This conference will now be recorded.
One of the areas that really brings a lot of people to our stretch of the river is called Satan's Kingdom. This is a very popular tubing. We've had numbers up to about 600 tubers an hour come through here on busy days. Those numbers are combined concessionaire. There is a concessionaire called Farmington River Tubing that operates there, plus independents, so that 600 total is combined, both user groups. This area has already been on the map for many years because of this tubing operation, but with continued promotion, I think that's one of the large contributing factors here to more people coming. This whole stretch of river, ESPN has done fishing shows. The Connecticut Tourism Board promotes it. Many people discuss their tubing run on social media, and so on and so forth. So I think, people would probably find it on their own, but the continued promotion of the area really has been adding to the crowds that we see here. We're going to talk more in a moment about the River Steward program, but really the start of the River Steward program, or at least one of the main contributing factors, was in this stretch of river here in Satan's Kingdom. A lot of concerned landowners started approaching the FRCC, which stands for the Farmington River Coordinating Committee. They're the managing agency on this wild and scenic stretch. So these concerned landowners approached the FRCC, and they came and said, we've got people trespassing on our land, people littering, what are you guys going to do about it? And that was really one of the big driving forces which started this River Steward program. One other point to note is this year Farmington River Tubing did not operate because of COVID, and because of this we had a lot of unsupervised independent tubers, as we'll call them, going down the river, which led to a lot more problems. Next slide, please. So our stretch of the river, the Wild and Scenic Upper Farmington, is 15.1 miles long. One of the challenges in really doing outreach and sort of patrolling this area is that river access is so easy. I've looked at some rivers where the Saco, for instance, up in Maine, when I first started with our Steward program, I went up to that area to look for ideas what we could maybe implement here in Farmington. And what was kind of unique there is they had 2 or 3 major put-ins, and then the river went away from most of the roads into the wilderness. So it was very easy for them to set up a program that they could monitor these put-in areas, do outreach there. Our stretch is much different. For the majority of that 15 miles, there's roads on both sides of the river, and people can just pull off wherever they want. So if you try to close one area off, they just move somewhere else. So it's really difficult to control access here on the Farmington. This past summer, DEEP, which is the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection here in Connecticut, the tubing area does have its own put-in and a smaller takeout. So on the busy summer days, they actually tried to close Satan's Kingdom put-in, thinking this would alleviate some of the stress on the takeout, which is definitely the pinch point. We had stewards actually doing user counts that day on the river, and the user counts really didn't go down at all. We just saw that users went up river a half a mile or whatever and put in somewhere else. So again, very, very hard to do any sort of enforcement by controlling access points here on this stretch. Next slide, please. So our River Steward team, back in 2014, I was hired by FRCC first to basically do a study of the river, just to really reaffirm all the issues that they had been hearing about from landowners and groups around the river. So with that information in hand, 2015 was the first year we actually started our Steward program, and we've been doing that ever since. So here's a picture from our group. This was, I think, 3 years ago. Our stewards are a combination of paid stewards that we typically hire from colleges, and then we also have some local volunteers. Many times they're landowners that just want to get involved with helping to protect the river. But typically the college students are going to school for some sort of an environmental field, and they're happy to get the experience. Next slide, please. So our common problems, and I'm sure other rivers here are seeing the same thing. Litter, as more users come, obviously litter is going to go up. You see a picture here, a good example of riverbank erosion due to usage. This is actually the tubing takeout for Independence, which is about 200 yards downstream from where the paying tubers take out. They have a nice paved takeout area, ramp that goes up, but typically Independents that don't pay aren't allowed to get out here, and definitely not allowed to park in that area. So they move downriver. There's a small dirt parking lot, and you can see what happens when they all get out of the river in an unapproved place and trample all the vegetation, heading back up to their cars. Trespassing, that's a real issue on the Farmington. Alcohol abuse. The put-in and the takeout are both on state land, but the problem with the current alcohol ban there, it's really only enforceable when the tubers are either putting into the river and still on land, or after they get out of the water at the takeout. I don't know if this is the case in other states, but in Connecticut, it's very hard to do any sort of alcohol enforcement once they're on the water. So, anytime we have had officers, they try to reach the people before they get into the water, but if they manage to make it onto the river, then that's sort of a neutral area where they get away with a lot of things. Lastly, on here you'll see parking problems as one of the bullet points. In years past, when the concessionaire is operating, they actually have a shuttle bus that picks up the tubers, and this takes a lot of the stress off the takeout areas. This year, due to COVID, the buses were not running, and anybody or any group anyway that was tubing now had to leave a car at the put-in and at the takeout. So we had a lot more problems this year with traffic at the takeout. We had cars parked all along the main state road, tubers walking on the road. Sometimes they're intoxicated. So a real hazard, especially this year, again, due to COVID. Next slide, please. So as far as, one of the questions is how do you reach these people when they come to your area? And it is challenging. For us, the tubers come from all over Connecticut and even some of the adjoining states like Massachusetts. And it's really, if you were to try to do more of a local campaign, like, putting up flyers on bulletin boards or maybe even ads in newspapers, it's really hard to target because they're just coming from all over. So most of the messaging that we're able to do is with social media. We do a lot of stuff on Facebook and Instagram. We're currently actually working with we've got a bid out now to work with an advertising company to come up with some messaging that can maybe be put on the radio or or used in conjunction with the Connecticut Tourism Board. So stay tuned on that. We're just in the midst of getting that up and running. I would say most of our problem tubers are under the age of 30. We see tubers from all ages, but most of the problem tubers are under 30. So, at least we know kind of which age group we need to be targeting with our messaging. Our steward team will go out on the river. We try to engage as many users as we can face to face. We find it's definitely more successful when you engage with people before they put on the river and start drinking than after when they take out. So a lot of our efforts are focused at the put-ins. We do have a couple inflatable kayaks that this year we didn't use because of COVID, but the stewards will also go out sometimes on the river and engage people on the water. It's not always via the land. And then we'll also there's a lot of local events here. We've got some organizations like the Historical Society. We've got a Friends of organizations. So whenever they have events, the stewards will partake. We have a little show booth that we set up, and we'll engage them at the booth, and we've got some marketing materials to hand out. So that's typically the stewards do a lot of education and outreach, attend local shows, and post on social media. That's where they spend the majority of their time. Next slide, please. So a little bit about enforcement. As hard as we try with our education and outreach, we've definitely come to the conclusion that there is a smaller percentage of people that just will not be reached by our normal methods, and they need that enforcement component. I don't think it's that large a group, maybe it's 5 or 10% of the people, but there are those troublemakers that enforcement goes a long ways. The NCON officers, as they're called in Connecticut, they're stretched very thin. There's only a handful of them to work all of the rivers, all of the lakes, the shoreline. So we don't see them very often up on our river, but when they do come, it does go a long way. All it takes is the word to get out. Oh, there's an officer writing tickets. They're watching the tubers, and we're working with DEEP to see if we can try to get them to come out on a little more of a regular schedule. But again, their help is very much appreciated. There is also, we do have 2 local police departments, the town of New Hartford and the town of Canton both have a small police force, and really up to now, they've unfortunately haven't been that much involved. We're making some great inroads though with Canton this year. I was just on another call today. I think we're gonna have the help of their police department this summer. Canton has a new selectman this year, and he's very interested in being involved with our steward program. So I think things will turn around in Canton, and now we just need to work a little more on getting the other town involved. But enforcement is definitely a component we need here on our stretch. Next slide. That's pretty much it. That's our little section of the world. Here's our logo for the steward program, no glass, no trash. We put that on our website. We use it in our flyers. When we post on social media, we use the hashtag no glass, no trash. So that's sort of become an identifiable logo that the steward program and the FRCC uses. So thank you, and I guess we're holding questions until the end.
Right, thanks, Stephan. And I think we're going to roll right on to John. And John, you can introduce yourself, but we'll just keep on going and have questions at the end.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is John Kreski. I'm the Rationing and Agreement Coordinator for the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area. We're a Colorado Parks and Wildlife Park, and we are noted for whitewater rafting, although what we're seeing more, as you see the slide here, is our whitewater parks are turned into what the locals call the beaches. It's a place for people to go and cool off. One of the resources that I have available is our website, and it's cpw.state.co.us. And it's a wealth of information from publications from the management plan to river boat safety, videos there, just and maps showing our headwaters recreation area. This photo, of course, is taken in August. Normally, where those families are standing, that would be underwater during the runoff in June. So we're a little different in the sense of tubing is there, but it's primarily focused in our whitewater parks. We're 152 miles long, running from the just near Leadville, approaching 9,000 feet, down to Lake Pueblo at about 5,000 feet. And again, one of the things that we don't have long stretches of tubing is, one, the water is cold. The normal water temps in June is in the 50 degrees, and by the time it hits July and August, it gets into that 60-degree mark. So there's also there's a lot of private land along these stretches, so the tubing is kind of limited to the whitewater parks. Now, the whitewater parks were built in our 4 municipalities, Buena Vista, Salida, Canyon City, and Florence. And they were built and engineered for features designed to have hydraulics. And the hydraulics itself, there'll be several drops and so many features within the Whitewater Park. But they're a strong enough hydraulic that will, keep a kayaker playing into that feature for a long period of time. But what we notice is, again, those that aren't partaking in kayaking or rafting, they'll partake in hanging out at the Whitewater Park from tubing. We do have a couple vendors within the park areas that rent tubes. We don't consider them a permittee to the AHRA, but the stretches are limited to probably only a half a mile. And those stretches, of course, you'd run the features, and then there's a trail along these parks that you would just get out and walk back up and do it again. But it is a communal thing. Everybody enjoys it and everybody shares those features. But as the years became, about 15 years ago, we noticed that a lot of kids weren't wearing life jackets. And so about 15 years ago, we enforced a Colorado law that anyone under the age of 13 swimming anywhere on the river must have a life jacket. We don't necessarily enforce it, ticket people, but we do warn people that they have to have a life jacket. And then just recently, well, prior to that too, anybody that was on an inner tube, an air mattress, or any other similar device must have a life jacket on. That was all ages. A couple of years ago, then we did go to a law that anybody with all ages within the Whitewater parks must have a life jacket. And of course, that was for the safety of everybody and educating everybody. So great idea, but a lot of people show up and they don't have life jackets. So if we can go to the next slide, please. We started to build a loaner station. These loaner stations have life jackets for people to use. And we're getting our life jackets from donations. Some of the bigger outfitters around the country, like Oars, are submitting us life jackets. Of course, we'll inspect them to make sure they're usable. And they might be a little worn, but they're still will create the flotation. On that right, there's a ranger help putting the life jackets on users. So when the rangers do go down to these whitewater parks and they'll see somebody that's not wearing them, if they're either boogie boarding, swimming, inner tubing, of course, we're in the educational stage of informing people that they have to have a life jacket while they're in these whitewater parks. And didn't have too many problems. Of course, we've lost a few life jackets, but majority of the time people are returning them and showing good example for the others that really don't know the physical force of whitewater and the features, the hydraulic features in these parks, that they'll take you down. Those features will suck you down deep into the water, and you come up gasping for air, and then depending on the time of year, are you strong enough to swim to shore? And of course, you're sharing it with other kayakers. But it's interesting how the main feature was built for kayaking, and then now it's turned into kind of these areas where people want to just go and cool off. And we'll go to the next slide, please. So these loaner stations, we just started to put them up, and I don't know if you can pretty much read that slide or not, but it's talking about, again, the rules, the laws, the regulations that we have on the Arkansas River. And again, anybody swimming in a whitewater park must have a life jacket. And of course, anybody under the age of 13 swimming anywhere on the Arkansas must have a life jacket. Of course, our river here is primary rafting. If you're a private boater, you don't have to have a life jacket on your boat, but if you're on an inner tube or an air mattress, you would. But you have to have a U.S. Coast Guard approved type 1, 2, 3, or 5 PFD on board. And most people abide to that because realizing that our gradient from 8,000 feet to 5,000 feet, the water is forceful and it is also cold. That's where we see most of our injuries are resulting from people going into the water, and more than a minute at 50 degrees, you're going to start to suffer hypothermia and struggle to swim. So that's what AHRA has done. We are not down there putting these life jackets on to people. There's that right board there, information board, kind of describes what type of jacket you should wear, the weight requirements, how to fasten it up. And if you ever go to coloradowebcams.net in the summer, July or August, and you find Salida Whitewater Park, you'll see how busy we really are. Now, we don't count how many people are using it. The only way we do counts is by photo images in some of our other stretches like Browns Canyon, Roll Gorge. But there is no entrance to count these folks. You can anticipate midday on a Saturday and the end of July, beginning of August, where it's nice and hot. Most people are on vacation. You're going to see a lot of people down there. In fact, what it's done is at this Salida Whitewater Park, we have a boat ramp, and a lot of the users, the private users, rafting, and the commercial users, they'll bypass these boat ramps now just because of the congestion that's on the boat ramps, backing your car down, trying to get your boat loaded while people are all over the place. So it's turned into more of these whitewater parks are an area for people to go and enjoy the water, cool off. And of course, safety is our biggest concern with that. And that's why we kind of implemented these life jacket laws within our park. And that's all I have, and thank you.
Thank you, John. So that's an example of being really creative and addressing what kind of an emerging need of people who might not know about life jacket use. So keep us posted on how that goes. And our final example, this is you'll see, this is the granddaddy of tubing land. We're going to have Beverly Lopez, who is the assistant manager of Word, and tell us when you get on, Beverly, tell us what Word is, because I remember when I first saw you as members, and I thought you're an ecumenical council or organization down in Texas, but it stands for something else. But welcome.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you guys for having me again. I'm Beverly Lopez. If you actually look at my next slide, I added a little bit of detail about who it is and what we do. So we stand for the Water-Oriented Recreation District out here in Comal County. We're actually created in the 1980s for tourism. So people were coming to this area, they were littering, they were having a great time, and the county residents did not want to foot the bill for someone else's problems. So what they ended up doing is created this special district. And what we do is we collect user fees directly from the tourists, and then that money goes back into the district. We have a $1.8 million budget, and 70% of those funds go directly into two core functions, which I'll talk about today, and that's going to be cleanup and law enforcement. So that's just a little bit about who we are. If you look at my next slide, so the river that we have here is going to be the Guadalupe River. This is a picture of a typical summer Saturday. Hundreds of thousands of people come to this river every year, and we call our non-traditional river users tubers. So you can see it's just a mass group of people hanging out in the water. What I want to talk about today is on my next slide, and that's going to be the lower section of the Guadalupe River. So this is a section of the river that comes out of Canyon Lake, and it's popular for two main reasons. So first is going to be the horseshoe, which is that U section at the top. So that's the free public access point to the river. You can essentially get in at the exit, float to the exit, and then walk back to the entrance. And so you walk back to the entrance, and you can do that float multiple times. It's only a mile long, but on a typical Saturday in the summer, we'll have about 5,000 people floating that section. The other popular area of the lower section of the river is going to be River Road. So River Road is a road that runs along the Guadalupe River, and it has hundreds of campgrounds and lodging facilities. On a typical weekend in the summer, we'll have about 50,000 campers and lodgers along the riverbanks there, either tubing or just recreating next to the river. Our next slide shows actually who's coming to our area. So I know with COVID, a lot of people have shifted in their tourism. For us, it was a little bit different. So we have these three main groups. The first group are going to be our locals, and because they're familiar with how the area is, they're going to be our big weekday users. You won't see them out here on the weekend because they know the amount of people that are here. Our middle group is going to be our big river rental group. For those of you who are not familiar with Texas, we are centrally located in between Austin and San Antonio, which are two major cities here. And this year, they had a lot of closures to their lakes and rivers. So all of these crowds from Austin and San Antonio were driving to us and hanging out here for the weekend. And then our last group is going to be the group that's driving 3+ hours to get here. This is going to be our big camping and lodging group, and they'll be here for multiple days because they're driving 3 hours to get here. And go ahead and go to our next slide. So like the other presenters had, littering here is an issue, and I'm sure a lot of you have that at your rivers. So one example of unintentional littering is going to be that middle picture with the barrel. So that what happens on River Road is the campground will have a barrel. The barrel will end up in the river, and it ends up showing up on someone else's property. Tubers assume this is a trash can, so they start filling it with trash, unknowing that this is not an actual trash can that's getting service. So it creates litter on the river, and then our river teams have to go out there, remove the barrel, and remove all the trash that they leave next to it. That picture on the right-hand side is an example of what happens when our river level rises. It brings all the cans that are at the bottom of the river, and then once our river level drops, it exposes all those cans that were brought up, and so that's one of our river personnel cleaning up those cans that were left over. Another issue that we have on my next slide is going to be overcrowding. Like I mentioned, the Horseshoe is only a mile long section of river, so we have 5,000 people on that river section. It's going to be very crowded. My next slide actually shows a side-by-side comparison. So the top is going to be during our off season, which is right now, and the bottom picture is going to be what our peak season looks like. So this is going to be from Memorial Day weekend all the way to Labor Day weekend. This is what a typical weekend looks like here in our district. So you see there's people using the river for day use areas. It's just like a beach. We have rafts there, we have tubes there, and then we have lines of people trying to get in. This issue actually resulted in a newer issue that we experienced the last couple of years, which is on my next slide, and it's people finding new areas to recreate on the river. This is actually the bottom of Canyon Dam, so where the Canyon Lake releases into the Guadalupe River. And traditionally, it's used as a fishing pier. We have a nice little fishing area down there, and we actually stock some trout in that area. What was happening these past couple of summers where people were just trying to find any way to get to the river. So they created their own day use area. And because we weren't anticipating any type or this specific type of use, we had to create services and pull services and make sure we had law enforcement there and clean up there because it's just a completely different type of use than what we were expecting. So if you go to my next slide, one of the things we do here is we focus on education, and we do that by providing tools and guidance to our tourists. So our first slide here under education is going to be our Stash Your Trash mesh bags. So these mesh bags, we order 120,000 of them every spring, and we distribute them to businesses in the summer, and they'll hand out a bag per group. So they have our river and lake laws. We have them in English and in Spanish because we do have a huge Hispanic demographic that comes to the area. And then we also have mesh bag stations, which is this box on the left-hand side. We place those at public access points because if they can access the river at a public access point, it means they may not be using a business, so they won't have any education when they're getting into the river. So this is what we do at public access points. The next slide shows our education through our ward staff. So again, the Horseshoe is one of the few public access points that we have here. So we'll station personnel at the entrance and at the exit point. At the entrance, they're one of the first and only education points that people may have. And so they're explaining them what the water laws are. They're explaining them where they need to exit, and just depending on the river flow, explaining what their flow time is looking like. Our next slide shows the exit, which we call our street teamers. So these guys are actually giving out prizes for people who are using their mesh bag, throwing their trash in the bag instead of throwing it in the river. They're also explaining to people that this is the last public exit point. So if you did not use a business, you don't have a takeout further downriver, you need to get out now. So that's just how we educate here. And for this summer, because of COVID, we did have to pull our street teams and staffing, and we pushed all of our education out online, whether it was social media or we would send mass emails to the businesses who would then relay that information to their visitors. But like that next slide showed, not everyone is going to listen to the education points that we have. So we do have contracts in place. The cleanup contracts that we have for this section of the river, there's 3 of them. And as you can see, this is what a typical river cleanup looks like. Our frequency of the cleanups are based on the popularity of the site. And so if you look at our next slide, it actually gives you a scope breakdown. The way our river teams conduct their cleanups is they have 3 personnel in canoes. One's on the left, one's on the right, and one's going down the middle. They're cleaning up to 3 feet off the riverbank and 3 feet deep. For the horseshoe specifically, we're running that section 3 times a week. If we need to, we'll add on additional cleanups. But for those exit barrels, so there's pictures of these barrels, we have 10 barrels at the exit point of the horseshoe. And we have station personnel whose only job on the weekend is to stand there and empty out those barrels. When you have thousands of people exiting at a time, those barrels are just constantly getting full of trash. So we have someone stationed there and they're just emptying the barrel and cleaning the exit point. One change that we did do this summer because of COVID was we switched our station personnel to roving personnel. So they were going to these barrels, to the barrels at the exit or at the entrance, and then other barrels throughout the district and coming back. So they weren't staying in place, they were rotating around. And then our next slide shows the law enforcement contract. So we do have about 60 officers working our contract on any given weekend in the summer. This is an example of our river team. So they're in the water, they're interacting with the tourists. An example here is you can see a couple different officers. They're talking to tourists and they're citing based on whatever contraband people have in the water. So here on our river, we don't allow glass, styrofoam, or little plastic containers, specifically Jello shot containers. We have no issues with Jello shots. We do have an issue with the trash that those little containers create, so those are banned on our waterways. In addition to our river teams, we have vehicle patrols for fire EMS and law enforcement on River Road. And then our next slide shows why we have to have traffic control. So this is an example of the entrance of our horseshoe. As you can see, we have shuttles, we have pedestrians, and we have vehicles. So our traffic control is at the entrance and at the exit. They're assisting shuttles get into their business. They're directing the visitor to their destination, and at times they're assisting pedestrian crossing. What is terrifying to see here in the summer is when you have a parent carrying a tuber in one hand and then a 2-year-old in another hand, and they're trying to cross the road. So our officers are there in place to make sure that they're staying safe and controlling and keeping everyone safe as much as possible. In addition to the traffic control we have at the horseshoe, we actually have a river team at the exit in the water because it's just a big congested area. We want to have a presence on the water, and having law enforcement down there helps a lot. In terms of our river teams, we removed those this summer, but we relocated them to the areas that people were finding to recreate. So that picture of the dam where we had all those loads of cars. We actually moved our river teams to do traffic out there, and we kept just rotating them around to hot spots that came up. And our next slide shows what we plan to do this coming year. So with COVID, we made a couple of different changes because we have these new recreation areas. We don't expect people to stop coming to those areas. So we added cleanup contracts to those areas. We've also made sure that our law enforcement contracts are going to be stationed there in the summer. Historically, we would make adjustments on our services based on hotspots, and those hotspots were primarily because of the river flows. With what took place this past summer, we now plan to make our adjustments not just on river flows, but on any restrictions that we have in place or any closures. For us, we did see the impacts of COVID in April. We had the county judge close down river outfitters and campgrounds. So in May, when our state started to reopen, people were being proactive where they were implementing touchless services, they were eliminating or reducing their shuttle use, but other businesses kept operating as usual, which resulted into an executive order that actually banned commercial tubing and rafting and then shuttles for those purposes. So people got very creative with their business practices. We had people who were using Uber to shuttle their customers, and then we also had people who were selling tubes and then buying them back at the end of their float. So they were really renting, but the loophole was because they were selling them and then purchasing them again, it wasn't actually rental. I want to thank you guys for allowing me to speak today, and I hope that I haven't scared you away, and hopefully you can come and visit us. I recommend in the spring, but if you want to brave out the summer, you are more than welcome to. And that's it.
Thank you, Beverly. I think you have scared everyone with this having to deal with the numbers that you manage, but so ably. And could you also just describe, you did when we were practicing, the process of, Mike, probably your colleague talked about this, but establishing the district, because that's such a big component of it. You have the money to pay for the services that you provide.
Yeah, and I did see that question pop up. So we were created in the 1980s because people were coming to the area and they were using the rivers for recreation. So we were actually voted into existence by the county residents. And at that point, we were able to issue permits to water-oriented related businesses. So that includes camping, lodging, whitewater guides, fishing guides. We have river rental equipment and boat storages. So a percentage of those fees collected by the user go to us. So for example, all of the river rentals, anytime you rent a tube out here in the district, there's a $1 word tax or a user fee that gets kicked back to us. Every year, our budget gets higher and higher because we have more people. So the best thing about Word is the fact that because we have all of this visitation, it increases our revenue, which then we can provide the services that we offer. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's great. It's a great model if someone else can, if you can follow it. So thank you guys, all the presentations. I guess we could open it to questions if you want to chat, or really, I guess since we're sort of listening, we have plenty of time. Unmute yourself and ask a question. I have a couple also, but would love to hear from others. And just say who you're asking, or all of them, or please don't be shy. I had a quickie one for Stephan, actually. When you were saying that NCON and New Hartford and Carlton, the law enforcement, what are the kinds of things that they are enforcing or fixing or addressing when they do have to come out?
So the NCON officers are a combination of what people think of as game wardens and police officers. So they have the ability of both. They can, any authority that a police officer has, they have, plus anything that's to do on the river with fishing violations. The NCON officers have historically been the ones that would do any sort of enforcement on the river. They're typically looking for alcohol at the put-in because the last couple summers there's been a specific ban at the tubing put-in, no alcohol, so they're checking for that. Again, once the tubers get on the river, there's not too much they can do about that unless somebody's really disorderly. Then they would probably pull them from the river, but that very rarely happens. So it's mostly enforcement of alcohol at the put-in and the take-in, and trying to deal with some of the parking problems at the takeout, the overcrowding. The local police, they've shown up a handful of times, and it's mostly if there's some sort of a disturbance at the river, they'll show up for that. But we really rely on the NCON officers to do most of the on-river work.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, I see. I saw chat, then disappeared. Here, it's Karita Waters asked, I'm curious if Beverly is doing any surveying of the users about what they see and do while on the river. How do existing users feel about their experience?
Yeah, so we did a couple different surveys. We have a lakefront property. For this past summer, we were doing surveys where we were asking people how they were enjoying their stays, specifically if they would refer us to their friends. And a lot of the feedback we got, besides them just saying yes, they would refer us, were they were really happy at our parks that we have, that we were social distancing and that we were limiting the number of people that were coming in. In terms of the river, we were just trying to identify. So in 2019, we ran a survey where we were just trying to identify where people were coming from and the age demographics that we saw. We haven't really had a survey on the river where we're asking, hey, did you enjoy your experience? I know a lot of rivers out here don't see the amount of people that we see. So in terms of visitor experience, I'm not sure if having all those people impact their experience because they're so used to coming here and seeing all those people. And the Horseshoe is a big party area, so you expect to see a lot of people, which is why those locals aren't coming here on the weekends. They know they want to enjoy the river. They're not coming on the weekends. But we do hope to start getting more surveys outside of our parks and moving to the Horseshoe area.
Okay, great. And then another question from Jeff Amaral for you, Beverly, is what kind of law enforcement do you contract with and who can issue citations?
So we contract with Comal County. We have an agreement with them. We use the Comal County Sheriff's Office. We also use the Comal County Constable's Office. They issue citations on the river for those river laws, like I mentioned. So anytime anyone has glass, anytime anyone has styrofoam, in Texas, similar to Arkansas, we don't allow you to have a vessel on the water without a life jacket. And if you're under the age of 12, you have to be wearing that. You can't just have it on the vessel, you have to wear it. So they're the ones who are ultimately enforcing. Our staff members that we have stationed are our education points, and they will try to keep people from bringing those on because at the beginning of the float, they're like, hey, that's a styrofoam cooler. It's not allowed here. When someone says, well, I don't care what you say, I'm going to get on here with my styrofoam cooler, at that point, they continue to educate and say, I'm not going to take your cooler from you, but just so you know, we do have officers on the water and they will cite you if they see that cooler, which can result into up to a $500 fine. So that we have contracts with the county law enforcement, and then we use our staff members to educate, but they're ultimately enforcing.
Right. And since I am unmuted, Beverly, you said how you're funded. John and Stephan, did you say how your crews are funded or your work?
The River Steward program receives its funds from the FRCC since it's a federally designated wild and scenic river. We do get some funding, and part of that is used for the River Steward program. We're just in the works with Canton to hopefully get some additional funding from them, and there's actually a couple neighboring towns that might also want to get involved, as well as an outfitter that's actually not on the wild and scenic section. So primarily up to now, it's been wild and scenic funding, but we may be receiving some additional this year.
And of course, the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area is a Colorado State Park under the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, so we're state employees.
Okay.
I put into the chat for, Stefan did this, but John, if you could put those 2 URLs into the chat, that would be great. You mentioned them, but you said really fast. And then Beverly, so folks can look up the, you mentioned the webcam and then the other one. Yeah, they were the really long one. Okay, great. There's one question from Martin. To anyone, what are you providing in terms of porta-johns or restrooms? That's a really important question.
So I can answer that for us. We have porta potties at different sections of River Road. So we'll ask landowners if they'll allow us to put these porta potties. And then this summer, we plan on putting some signage that says this was entirely funded by tourism dollars. So they are able to access it on the river trip.
So Beverly, the landowners, meaning on the banks. So right
Yes,
on the
ma'am.
river, right.
And so a majority on River Road, we have a lot of campground owners. So they're, putting their tubes out. They're also allowing us to put porta potties on there. So we have a good partnership with our permit holders because they do hold permits through us. And so they're able to work with us and allow us to do that. Additionally, we'll have some dumpsters at different campgrounds, so where our cleanup contractors can exit on their property and use those dumpsters for the river trash. So we do a lot of partnership with our permit holders here.
You have them up in the horseshoe as well, along the river?
The horseshoe, we have a dumpster towards the exit on a longer float. And then the horseshoe is a little different than most of River Road because it's primarily homeowners that operate or that own that section of the river. So homeowners do allow us to station law enforcement there. They'll let them park on their property and use the bank off of their property. We don't have many porta potties on there because they're not trying to encourage people to come in their backyard.
Right. How about you, Stefan? What's the porta potty situation there?
So when the concessionaire operates, they do have porta potties both at the put in and the takeout. This year they were sorely missed. We definitely had a lot of complaints from riverfront landowners. Further upriver, not specifically in that Satan's Kingdom tubing area, there are a couple public restrooms. There's one there's a state forest, so there's one in there, and then one in the center of Riverton. So there's a couple options outside of what the concessionaire usually provides.
Any questions or requests for suggestions with these people who have really great experience with large groups of people? The river. Well, if we don't have any questions, we could just roll on. Ed, are you looking to say something? Ed Fights, leaning forward? No? Okay. So I guess we could just go to the final couple of slides. And if a question occurs to you, please chime in. Just more about what we are doing at RMS. We want to thank everybody for joining us. So this is the RMS folks, and If you would like to, hopefully you'll have the information from the speakers. We'll post a recording of today. My bad, wait, I didn't start the recording until we were a little bit into it, so we might have to do a little bit of work to recreate the beginning part. Look for us on RMS Facebook group, and we will be hosting State River Manager monthly meetings every month, like the second week in the month about this time. And the topics will be like the ones that we've had in the past, where they're kind of operational, managing people, managing personnel, managing launch sites. And we will begin to do some that are of different kind of importance, but in our workplaces, where we started a little bit last summer, and we'll be digging into exploring how to make our workplaces more culturally accommodating, how to understand how to work with different types of folks to both welcome them into our office environments and workspaces, and for dealing with customers clients who are of different types. Let's see, any other questions? And Angie, you want to just talk about that? This is big for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know that registration is now open for the RMS Biennial Symposium, and it's going to be virtual this year. Highly encourage everyone to go to the website and check it out. There's lots of great speakers lined up, presentations, training, all sorts of great things.
Well, with that, I think we can thank you again.
Yeah.
And we'll be here next month. We're gonna and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Keep washing your hands.
Thank you all. Thank you, presenters.